Tonight on Greater Boston, international affairs expert Tom Nichols joins me on why he's convinced the worst is yet to come for Ukrainians and for Putin. But how does this ever end? Then later, the chief investigator of a new Brigham and Women study into long COVID, along with a patient who's been living with debilitating symptoms for nearly a year and a half after she contracted the virus. And finally, Boston Globe CEO Linda Pizzuti Henry on the paper's 150th anniversary, plus her role in a $75 million investment in the WNBA, the most ever put toward a women's sports league. Through talks of sanctions and oil prices and the economic burden the rest of the world is willing to bear, and the sad but orderly scene so many of us have seen of Ukrainian refugees leaving for other countries, the New York Times is forcing us to confront the human toll of Russia's invasion with a graphic photo on today's front page showing a family moments after they were hit by a mortar, killing the mother and two kids, wounding the man who also later died. They'd been trying to flee the town of Irpin, west of Kyiv, where the mayor says Russians have been intentionally targeting civilians as they have been elsewhere across Ukraine. It's a level of cruelty that's hard to wrap your head around. As international affairs expert Tom Nichols recently wrote in The Atlantic, night after night I find myself staring at the television, almost paralyzed with anger and grief. Russian President Putin, after a catastrophic strategic miscalculation, is now embroiled in perhaps the greatest military blunder in modern European history. And for those interested in rewriting the history that led to all this, Nichols isn't having it, as he proved on MSNBC last night after a fellow guest defended Donald Trump's Ukraine policy and claimed the former president had been tough on Russia.
I can't let it stand to say that Trump was somehow tough on Russia here. There has to be a correction involved because the policies of the U.S. government were tough on Russia, put in place under Bush and Obama. Trump was impeached specifically because he was trying to get other people to break the law to undermine those existing policies because he didn't want to be perceived as rolling back those policies. I have to make that correction.
And I'm glad he did, and that he joins me now. Tom Nichols is a regular contributor to The Atlantic and author of its Peacefield newsletter. Tom, it's good to see you again.
You too, Jim.
So on your Twitter account, I read essentially that the worst is yet to come for Ukraine, but the Russians will lose the war. Could you explain both?
Well, the initial Russian war plan has gone completely to hell. They were supposed to sweep in and have this thing done and be greeted as liberators and replace the Ukrainian government with a puppet government, all within maybe a week to 10 days. That has completely unraveled. And so the Russians are going to go back to the only playbook they know, which is to flatten everything in sight and to level buildings and to kill civilians. But in the end, Putin either has to occupy this country forever, which he can't do, or he's going to have to accept some kind of outcome where he's going to end up having to withdraw without completely subjugating Ukraine. And so even if he wins in the short term, he loses. And I think that this has really been a disastrous miscalculation for Russia that's going to cost Russia years of development economically, as well as militarily.
I want to return to that in a couple of minutes. You wrote in The Atlantic, sitting on your couch, looking over at your wife as tears were welling in her eyes, and you said you felt hopeless. By the way, I've had the exact same experience, both of them, sitting on my couch. But you go on to say that the worst thing we could do, we being the U.S. or NATO, is to get directly involved. And your reasoning goes beyond the conventional reasoning that it means World War III. Why would it be a horrible mistake, according to you, Tom?
Because right now, the only thing that can save Putin and extricate him from this disaster is a NATO intervention. His people are against it. The world is against him. And I think in some ways, if the man is capable of praying at all, he's praying for a NATO intervention, because then he'd be able to rally his country, rally his military, fight the war that his military has been preparing to fight for decades, and be able to turn to the world and say, see, this really was about NATO. This really is about Russian security. When, in fact, it's not about any of those things. It's about him trying to crush a democracy of 40 million Slavs that are just too close to his border.
So even if your analysis is right, and it appears the governments of all the NATO nations, including the United States, seems to agree it's a horrible mistake, if the atrocities pile up, as they already are, and or Zelensky is deposed, is the West able to resist direct intervention as everybody sits home at night having the exact same experience you did on your couch?
Well, I suspect there won't be any choice, because for NATO to intervene, it would take a unanimous vote of 30 member nations, and I don't think that's going to happen.
How about us?
Well, I think the United States going in without NATO is highly unlikely to happen. President Biden just spent a lot of political capital to get us out of Afghanistan. And I think, as I say in the piece, it is to our shame, but the United States has managed to sit by and watch a lot of humanitarian disasters. We didn't intervene when nearly 1 million people were killed in Rwanda. We are still standing by, even though the death toll in Syria has now reached something like 600,000.
Yeah, but we didn't all sit home and watch that on television and see every family either slaughtered or interviewed or stopped from crossing the border. Isn't that a different dynamic in 2022?
It might be. The power of images can rouse people to great anger, and I feel that anger, and Kiev's a place I've been. I have been to Odessa and many other places in Ukraine. I'm also I'm an Orthodox Christian. I mean, I'm watching a fraternal bloodbath between people of my own religion. But as I say in the piece, I just don't think emotion is a good guide to policy. I think if we wade into this, it saves Putin in the long run, and let us not ignore the problem you mentioned earlier, Jim, which is that it could turn into a general European war and perhaps even a world war.
Speaking of that, I want to play for you. Here is President Zelensky speaking Sunday in a Twitter video, speaking to international leaders. Here he is.
It's your humanitarian duty to protect us, to protect civilians. And you can do it. If you don't do it, if you don't at least give us airplanes so we can defend ourselves, the only thing we can think is that you also want us to be killed slowly.
And we appear to be giving him airplanes indirectly. Apparently, it's in the works that Poland will provide the Ukrainian forces with airplanes they can fly. We'll backfill that, I guess, is the theory. Why is that less to be recognized by Putin as a direct involvement of the United States than a direct involvement is, if he chooses to call it that?
Well, first, I don't criticize Zelensky for trying to get all the help he can get. That's just, the man is under siege and he wants help to come from wherever it can come for his country. But there are differences. Ukrainian pilots flying missions, just like Ukrainian soldiers using javelins and stingers, is different than having American or British or German or Dutch troops fighting against the Russian military. And I think people should understand something. When we talk about things like a no-fly zone, I think Americans have come to believe that terms like this are magic. Most of the killing that's being done is being done by Russian ground units, not from the air. And if you put in a no-fly zone, you're going to end up tempted to do a kind of Libya operation where you fly over the country, but you also strike military targets on the ground. And I think if people need to know what they're talking about here, to what they're embracing. If you want to engage in direct military action with the United States and NATO against Russian forces, then you need to say so. Terms like no-fly zone are comforting euphemisms that really mean war. And the only thing that'll save the Ukrainians are destroying those units on the ground. And people need to think about what's involved with that if Americans and other members of Western nations are the ones doing that, rather than Ukrainians being given the tools to do it for themselves.
We only have a couple of seconds left. I want to return to what you said earlier. So you think the slaughter continues, and at some point when Putin realizes that he can't hold this country, he slinks home, and that's how this thing ends?
He's not going to slink home. He's going to sit on a lot of territory. He's going to leave forces in place. we'll probably get chunks of Ukraine being in another frozen conflict like the Donbass. But the original plan of sweeping in, replacing the government, and then recreating Ukraine as some sort of member of a Russian federation, which was really the plan, isn't going to happen. And someone is probably telling Putin that right about now.
Well, including you. Tom Nichols, thanks so much for your time as always. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
For almost as long as we've known about COVID, we've also known about long COVID, symptoms that last for weeks, months, or even years after the initial infection. And yet 2 years into the pandemic, there are still far more questions than answers about the condition. Last week, Virginia Senator Tim Kaine became the public face of long COVID, revealing he's suffered from symptoms since his diagnosis nearly 2 years ago.
I have lingering nerve tingling 24/7 all over my body. I tell people it feels like all my nerves have had just like 5 cups of coffee and they're just like ready to go. And it kicked in at the start of COVID and it's never gone away.
Researchers suggest anywhere from 5% to 50% of COVID survivors will still have lingering symptoms 6 months later, meaning somewhere between 4 and 40 million people in the U.S. with symptoms ranging from brain fog and confusion to debilitating fatigue, lung issues, heart problems, and more. Last month, the National Institutes of Health launched 15 different collaborations aimed at studying long COVID, including one here in Boston, where a consortium of 6 hospitals, led by Brigham and Women, has started recruiting patients for a 3-year project. Among those patients is Cassandra Cast, who joins me now, along with Dr. Bruce Levy, chief of Brigham and Women's Pulmonary Division and the principal investigator of this Boston study. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Doctor, what's the goal? Treatment, prevention, what? What do you hope to come up with at the end of 3 years?
Well, as you mentioned right off the top, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. And so we need to address those. And the initial purpose of the Recover Initiative is to start to address some of those and get some answers. What's the full clinical spectrum of long COVID? What are risk factors for developing it? And get some insights, I might say, into the underlying biology, the underlying mechanisms that are causing people so much suffering. The idea then would be to quickly follow up with targeted, rational therapeutic trials of new treatment approaches. But first, it's mostly an observational study that we're in right now.
Doctor, my understanding is your intention is to take into account the disproportionate impact on people of color that COVID itself has had in the long COVID study. How do you propose to do that?
That's absolutely right. It's very important to us here in Boston and nationally that we have a representative cohort of all those who have suffered so much from the acute infection from COVID. And that's, of course, disproportionately impacted our communities of color, Black and brown communities. So we have community-based efforts, and we're partnering with the community and community organizations to develop a community partnership table so that we can really have bi-directional education, so we can learn, but also we can bring education to the community. And our goal is actually over-representing the number of people, the cohort that we recruit here in Boston with Black, African-American, Hispanic individuals.
Cassandra, my understanding is you go to your father's funeral in October of 2020, and the next couple of months you're on a ventilator for a significant period of time. You suffer from kidney failure, yet you remember none of that at all. Is that correct?
That's correct. I remember, the last thing I remember is being at my father's funeral in Memphis, Tennessee. And then my first recollection, for some reason, the date of December 13th stands out. And I didn't come home until December 21st. And I remember nothing in between. It was devastating.
So from December 13th or the 21st till today, however many months, that is 15 or something like that, what have you experienced? What have you suffered from, Cassandra?
I suffer severely from extreme fatigue. There's a lot of brain fog. I still have motion issues with my right arm. Not exactly sure whether that was from positioning or whether it was from the effects of COVID. When I first came home, I could not walk because I had been sedated for so long. So it affects my everyday life. I can't do a lot of the things that I generally do. And it's very hard, and I'm so excited to be a part of this study because it's so important. People think that you just kind of make it up, but you don't have a choice. There's things that you can't. I literally, simply doing laundry takes all of my breath.
Cassandra, were you a pretty healthy person before your father's funeral, before you contracted COVID? You were, yeah.
Yes.
Doctor, we mentioned at the top, both you and I, how little we know or how much we still need to know. For starters, what is long COVID? How are you defining it for purposes of this research?
So it's really a term meant to capture the long-term consequences of having had the infection. And we think that anything before 30 days is still too closely tied to the current infection. So long COVID would begin 30 days after the diagnosis of an infection if people happen to have symptoms or disability, as Ms. Cast has, after 30 days. And we know that many people suffer for months and now even years with persistent symptoms. But long COVID is really meant to capture symptoms that should have gone away within the first 30 days that haven't.
Do we even know who's more likely to get it? For example, are you more likely to get long COVID if you're unvaccinated rather than vaccinated? Or do we not even know that yet?
Well, there is some really interesting data that's coming out, including some data that just came out within the last couple of weeks about risk factors. We're still learning, and what I'm about to share with you needs to be replicated. But there are a few risk factors that have emerged, one of which is related to the extent of the infection. So vaccinated people don't have as severe an infection. And so that's one possible way people can try to prevent getting long COVID. Another is the presence of type 2 diabetes. It appears that for some reason that is presenting itself as an important risk factor for the development of long COVID. The third is actually at the time of diagnosis with COVID to actually have circulating levels of the EBV, the Epstein-Barr virus, which is the mononucleosis virus. And everybody knows that one of the main symptoms with mono is extreme fatigue. Yeah. And why the COVID virus seems to reactivate the monovirus is unclear. That needs further research. But it's potentially a window into a therapeutic approach to try to address that.
Cassandra Cast, have there been periods during this, you described the physical symptoms, have there been periods during these 15 months, whatever it is, where you've lost hope of ever coming out the other side of this?
Yes, it's very hard because this is not who I am. And when you can't do simple things around your own home, it can be very, very heart-wrenching, depressing also.
And you said before how glad you are to be a part of this study. Is this what you're hanging your hope on, that there is another healthier, safer, happier life for you?
Absolutely. I just have to believe that I'm here for a reason, and I want them to ask as many questions and study as much as possible, because it's heart-wrenching when you can't walk from your kitchen to your living room. And this study hopefully will really show why and how to change that. And I'm really glad to be a woman of color for the diverse population.
Well, I hope it's as successful as you hope, Cassandra Cast, for you and millions of others. And Bruce Levy, thank you so much for your time. Good luck. We'll stay in touch with both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Exactly 150 years ago this past Friday, a Boston institution was born. The Boston Globe printed its first edition on March 4th, 1872. For the past 8+ years, the paper's been under the ownership of John Henry, who also runs another small institution in town. Then in 2020, Linda Pizzuti Henry made history when she became the first woman to ever run the newspaper. And as of last month, she's also contributing to the largest ever investment in a women's sports league, $75 million for the WNBA. Boston Globe CEO Linda Pizzuti-Henry joins me now. Linda, it's great to see you.
I am so happy to be here. It's great to see you, Jim.
I'm glad you're here. Happy anniversary, by the way.
Thank you.
So did you learn anything about the Globe that you didn't know during the preparation of the 150th anniversary that really stuck with you?
There was a lot. So our sesquicentennial, we started working on a couple years ago, and we just thought it was a really great opportunity to tell our story and reintroduce, celebrate where we've come from and where we're going. And we had a lot of fun. We dug up old crossword puzzles, which has been one of the more popular
I tried
things.
doing it. It was
How'd you do?
hopeless. I really did try.
Just sort of the role that the Globe has played was great to see, where you see the different advice columnists, the recipes, the fix-it, the love letters, sort of all of the different things that have really just been a part of our community for so long. It was really fun to dig through.
Does it make you feel at all that you have even a heavier burden on your shoulders? It isn't like you're running just a newspaper, but you're running, I'm serious, you're running something that's been central to the lives of millions of people for 150 years. Is that doing anything for you? Or?
I feel really lucky, and I also feel, I think that when you're running an organization, there's this natural tension between doing what you do really well every day and also planning for the future. And we do a lot of both. And sometimes we'll manage one a little bit better than the other, but we're really just focused on how do we take this incredible legacy that we have and have it be this modern multimedia organization that serves our community for years to come.
My focus is usually what am I going to have for lunch? That's about as far as I go. Speaking of the future, since you took over, I just thought, beyond the incredible reporting every single day with Brian McGrory and the reporters and everybody, Stat, 6 or 7 years ago, probably the national leader on medicine and health stuff. The Emancipator, actually the two co-editors on the radio with us tomorrow, which tends to reframe the whole discussion about racial equity and that sort of stuff in this country. Is there anything on the immediate horizon, another expansion, another new thing you can tell us about?
Yeah, so, Stat News, our foray into life sciences was this idea of how do we show what's best, what are we in this region best at, that the center of the news should come out of, and that's life sciences. And that's been, it's taken us a number of years, but we've built up this incredibly strong, trusted news organization, and we're looking at what's next now. We've been doing a lot of research, and we will hopefully be getting more heavily knowledgeable and up to speed in the Web3 space, and we'll see where that goes. But we have smart teams that are working on that now.
Why do you want to run a newspaper? You have a real estate background for those, and you're a local kid for those that know, a Linfield kid. Why do you want to run a newspaper?
I love this community, and there's all these different projects that I've been really lucky to work on that I feel help make this a better place where more people can live, work, and thrive. And I can't imagine anything more worthwhile that I could do with my time and energy than to have the most strong, trusted, and well-resourced news organization for this community, because that helps everything else that you care about being successful in this city.
Well, this has been a miserable couple of decades, though, for newspaper. No, I don't mean in life in general. Well, it has the last couple of years, but for newspapers, shrinking ad revenue. You know this much better than I. Shrinking staffs. What's the state of the Globe? How healthy is the Globe in 2022?
I'm really proud. It's taken us a lot of very, very hard work, but we are on the other side and we are thriving.
You make money?
We do, and we're investing it into our newsrooms. We're expanding, we're adding new beats, we're adding deeper coverage, we're adding more features. We have rebuilt the entire organization, from our printing facilities to our offices to our whole technology stack to our CMS to our security, to every aspect. We have just poured money in to really invest and make it a strong, stable organization for many decades to come.
Speaking of pouring money in, you're part of the $75 million investment. I think it's the largest ever in a women's sports thing. Am I right about that?
It is.
Condoleezza Rice, Lorene Powell Jobs, a whole bunch of pretty prominent people. I want to ask you, I read, I think in your paper, this story that at least part of the impetus for this was a question your then 6-year-old daughter asked you, which was, are girls allowed to play basketball? Is that true or is that apocryphal?
No,
is that really true?
It's true. She asked me if girls were allowed to play baseball.
Oh, baseball, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Okay.
We were at Fenway, and it was just sort of this horrible. At first, I was like, "Well, that's a dumb question," but then I realized it was because she had never seen women play sports. She had seen a lot. By that point, she had seen a lot of baseball and a lot of soccer, and she had never seen women doing anything. And so it was sort of when I realized how much representation matters.
She ever ask you if women can run a newspaper? She never asked you. She didn't.
No, she sees
She
that.
knows that. Okay, fine.
That's totally possible.
So is there? I've tried to read whatever I can about this investment, and there's very little. Are we going to get a team as a result of your investment? I mean, there's got to be some return, I assume, other than the goodness of your heart investing in something you care about. Is there?
Well, right now they have 12 teams, and they are not currently looking to expand, but they will hopefully in the future be looking to expand. So I don't know if Boston will be on the list or not.
Have you talked to the WNBA about
The
that?
WNBA is using this investment to really beef up the league. It's been going for 25 seasons, and they're going to be build out their digital offerings, their marketing, whatnot. It's a really exciting opportunity to grow their product.
And I hope salary too. And one of the things you read in this sad story, and I hope she's safe from the Brittany Griner thing, with obviously being held on drug charges by the Russians. I hope she gets out of there soon. Is she the top salary? I didn't know this in the WNBA. You obviously know it. It's $225,000 or something. And she's making $1.5 million in Russia.
Yep.
How does the league prosper if you can make so much money overseas?
Well, that's one of the things that they're really trying to do is increase salary. So the minimum is up to $60,000 now, and they've increased the ceiling on the top. And you need more, in order to fund those salaries, you need more TV coverage, right? You need more sponsorship. So Nike joined this investment round, and that's a really important thing. So there'll be more sponsorships for the league and for the players through that. Those are really what you need. It's television and sponsorships.
So you're a partner in the Fenway Sports Group, which people know baseball has a hockey team now, and obviously Liverpool, the soccer. Congratulations, by the way. Is your goal with women's sports? I know this is an individual investment by you, not part of the Fenway Group. Is your goal to start with women's basketball and then expand into other sports, or no? You?
Me personally, I think I see the power of sports to bring people together and what it can do for a community. You know, what's different is that a newspaper can bring people together on issues, and that's incredibly powerful. And I've known for even longer how sports can really bring a community together in a cohesiveness that the world needs right now. And I think that there's a lot of potential and power for women's sports. And so I am investing in the future of women's sports. I don't have ambitions for a team or anything like that at this point. We just want the league, after 25 years, to sort of take that next push forward.
But if your daughter someday says, are women allowed to box? Are women allowed to play hockey? You are all in, correct? You know, before you go, I just want to say on behalf of Marjorie Egan and me, and were it not for the brilliant content every single day in your newspaper, the brilliant reporting in your newspaper, we may not even be able to put on a radio show. So for everybody at home and for us personally, we want to thank you for the 150 years.
We have an extraordinarily talented newsroom and just a great team that I feel very lucky to work with. So thank you.
Linda, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for being here. In person,
In person,
I should say.
it's
I love
great.
that. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight. Please come back tomorrow. We'll hear from the former Holyoke Soldiers Home officials who say they were fired for raising security concerns after a COVID outbreak there that killed more than 70 veterans. Plus, some of the everyday heroes in Ukraine. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thank you for watching. Please stay safe.